Good evening, everyone. My name is Les Smith. I'm with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to this evening's conversation about the MPART PFAS Town Hall related to the Avon Landfill. Before we welcome our first presenter this evening, I have a couple of housekeeping items I'd like to share with you. First of all, I'd like to let you know that all of your lines are muted and that we are recording this webinar for future viewing, and you can share this recording at a later date with friends and colleagues who may have missed it this evening. But there is a way for you to talk to our panel tonight. Just want to let you know that at the bottom of the Zoom control panel, there's a Q&A box where you can type your questions in at any time during this evening's conversation. Also, during our question and answer portion tonight, you have the ability to raise your hand using the hand icon, just alerting us that you'd like to speak to the panel. And right now, for our panel tonight, so far, we don't have anyone on the phone, but if we do, we will revisit that later on in the presentation. And with that, I'm going to turn the virtual podium over to Abigail Hendershot. Abigail is the MPART Executive Director. Abby, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Les. Appreciate the introductions. Again, as Les said, my name is Abigail Hendershot. I am the Executive Director for the Michigan PFAS Action Response Team, we are bringing you tonight this important information on this particular site. And so I want to go through the introductions, logistics, and agenda with you quickly because I think it'll be very useful information. So tonight, we're going to have an MPART overview by Tracy Cascometti, our regional lead for EGLE, who handles all the PFAS stuff in the Southeast Michigan area. Amber Clace is our Department of Health and Human Services toxicologist, and she's going to be giving you some of the health effects and information on PFAS. Mary Carnegie is our project manager for the investigation area and is going to be leading you through some of the site-specific information that we have. And then Mary's also going to make sure that you figure out how to navigate to the website and actually take it through to the end where you can find this particular site on the MPART website. So there will be plenty of time for questions and answers at the end. But as Les said, if you have things that you think of while you're watching this, go ahead and kind of hover your mouse towards the bottom of your screen. You'll see the question and answer box come up. You can type those in as we go, and we'll answer them all at the end. So, and the meeting's being recorded. So I'm going to hand it over to Tracy, and thank you again for coming. Tracy, take it away.
All right, well, good evening, everyone, and thanks for that introduction, Abby. Again, I'm Tracy Cascometti. I work for the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, or what we call EGLE. I primarily work in the Materials Management Division, but I also work with MPART as the Regional PFAS Lead for Southeast Michigan. But I should tell you that this is my last week in that role, and so if you want to contact someone in Southeast Michigan related to PFAS, Mary Carnegie, who's going to be our main speaker tonight, she's going to be taking over for me as the regional PFAS lead. And so in addition to being a great contact for this site, you can reach out to Mary about any PFAS concern in Southeast Michigan, and she will get you to the right people. All right, so let's get through this MPART overview. So again, MPART is the Michigan PFAS Action Response Team. MPART was formed under an executive order and under Governor Snyder, and persists under a new executive order under Governor Whitmer. And it's really intended to be a communication structure. So it's a way that we bring together multiple agencies that have a role to play in addressing PFAS in Michigan and make sure that all those agencies and state government are coordinating and working together to address potential exposures. It's also a way that we interact with the federal government on projects and research, and then it also helps us when we're working on a specific project in the community, work with our local partners. And the MPART structure is really, I think, to credit for how effective we've been in quickly and comprehensively identifying sites of PFAS contamination and potential public health exposures. So I want to talk a little bit about the vocabulary and the language we use when we talk about PFAS. So when you hear us say PFAS, PFAS, This is per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. And when we use that term PFAS, we're referring to a family of chemicals, and it's a large family, over 5,000 individual chemical compounds. But they have a, similar chemical structure and this strong carbon-fluorine bond. But when we are sampling and we're doing a site investigation, we're looking at individual PFAS compounds. So that's when you might hear us say PFOA or PFOA or PFOS, PFOS, or different individual compounds that we have criteria for. But if we're just talking generally about a site of PFAS contamination, you'll hear us use the sort of overarching term that refers to the whole category of chemicals. And these were chemicals that were used across, many commercial and industrial applications. They're highly stable. They're largely used in, surfactants and, different chemistry where you need to repel water and oil, grease, so your stain treating and your apparel treatment, that sort of thing. Anything that was non-stick or stain resistant has PFAS chemistry involved in it. And these chemicals have been developed since, the 1940s. And so we've been using them in a range of applications for a long time. So this slide just shows you some of those industrial and commercial applications. The ones that we're probably in most day-to-day contact with are things like apparel, waterproof fabrics, stain-proof carpets. But industrial uses, PFAS compounds were used in metal finishing, oil and gas, and chemical and pharmaceutical applications. And PFAS is also the chemistry responsible for firefighting foam that allows us to safely put out jet fuel fires and hydrocarbon fires. And so this is, really useful chemistry. But what we've come to find out is that it has, environmental and health impacts that we were not aware of when this chemistry first was developed. So, we've been developing this chemistry since the 1940s, and so I think it's fair to ask, why are we concerned about this now? Part of that is that we're continuing to learn so much more about PFAS than we knew, even 10 years ago. And like you saw in the last slide, there's a range of uses for these chemicals, and so their occurrence in the environment is really widespread. They also don't break down easily. It's really stable chemistry, and so it doesn't biodegrade. It's hard to treat. It's hard to get rid of. And some of them build up in our bodies. They bioaccumulate, and they can bioaccumulate in our bodies, but also in fish and wildlife tissue as well. And so there can be a consumption issue with contaminated fish. Some PFAS chemicals can affect health. And Amber's going to talk about potential health effects, associated health effects in her presentation. The other thing is that we're still learning about PFAS. We consider it an emerging contaminant. There's a lot we don't know. We have criteria for 7 PFAS compounds in a family of 5,000, and there are no national standards. And so there's not consistent criteria under the Clean Water Act or the Safe Drinking Water Act that's being used all across the country. So each individual state is developing their own criteria. So there's a lot going on in this slide, but I like to talk about this, and this illustrates how PFAS moves through the environment and also the places that we're looking for it in trying to identify potential exposures. So if you start in that upper left part of the screen looking at the factory, think about this as a factory that used a PFAS compound, maybe in metal finishing, or maybe it was a paper mill that did, treated or coated papers. And those PFAS compounds can leave the factory in a couple of different ways. They can go out through the air emissions. Maybe that factory has a discharge to the local wastewater treatment plant, or a discharge permit directly to the river. Maybe there was, spills and leaks over time, and there was a release to the ground that's gotten through the soil and into the groundwater. So think about the PFAS compounds leaving that factory and entering the environment through a couple of different ways. And if you look at the path to the wastewater treatment plant, think about your municipal wastewater treatment plant that was designed to treat sewage. It wasn't designed to remove PFAS from water. And so that PFAS can pass through the wastewater treatment plant and go directly into the river. or it can build up in the sludge from the wastewater treatment plant. And then that sludge either goes to the local landfill or is land applied as biosolids. When you look at that landfill, the landfill leachate, which is the water collected at the bottom of a lined landfill, that very often goes to the local wastewater treatment plant, and the sludge from the wastewater treatment plant goes into the landfill. So you have a bit of a cycle there. But some of that sludge is land applied to farm fields, and that allows PFAS to infiltrate into the groundwater, potentially be taken up in plants. And all of these pathways into the environment, whether that's into the surface water or groundwater, provide a way that people can be exposed to PFAS. So if we are taking our drinking water out of a river, like a municipality will have a water treatment plant that draws off of a river, or if you have a private well, or if you're in a small community that uses groundwater as a source of drinking water, that can be a potential route of exposure if that water has been contaminated by PFAS. And so at EGLE, what we're doing is looking for these opportunities to find PFAS where it occurs in the environment. And so we've sort of systematically gone through and sampled all of our drinking water plants across the state. We've sampled factories that are discharging to wastewater treatment plants. We've sampled landfill leachate. We've sampled stormwater runoff from industrial facilities and wastewater treatment plant discharges to rivers. And anytime we find a site where the groundwater is contaminated with PFAS, the first thing we're looking at is how could someone be exposed to that? And is there anyone using the groundwater? Is anyone drinking the groundwater? And we sample the residential wells, which is, primarily what we're here to talk about tonight. So one of the places that we look for PFAS when we are doing our sort of routine work at EGLE is in surface waters across the state. And so our Water Resources Division surveys surface water and fish all across the state, rivers and streams and lakes, looking for a number of pollutants as so that we understand the baseline quality of our lakes and rivers. And so now we've added PFAS to that survey. So we're starting to understand what is the sort of human caused background that you might find in a typical lake or river, and then also potentially identifying a lake or river that's been impaired by PFAS and looking for sources. And so through some of this survey work, we have identified nearby sources of PFAS contamination. When they're doing this work, they're also collecting fish. And so we can find if fish have been impacted by water contamination. Amber's going to get into this a little bit more, but the primary route of exposure that we're concerned with PFAS is ingestion. So, we're always going to be focused on whether or not the drinking water has been impacted or whether or not fish that people are eating have been impacted. So when we do environmental sampling and we get the results back, obviously we have to have criteria to compare those results to make our decisions on, right? And so, like I mentioned in the beginning, we don't have nationwide criteria from EPA for drinking water or for groundwater cleanup. And so in Michigan, we've developed drinking water standards for 7 different PFAS compounds. Those are the ones listed here in the chart. This was based on our sampling of 2,700 different public water supplies across the state. We sampled the raw water and the finished water, and our health partners developed this criteria. You'll also see that, Mary, if you could head to the next slide. These are the same numbers that we use for groundwater cleanup. So this is the criteria that a water treatment plant has to meet when they are providing a community with water. It's the numbers that we look at when we sample residential wells and we compare the data we get back to these numbers. But also if we find a site of environmental contamination and we sample the groundwater, we're using the same criteria to look at that groundwater, because what we want to do is protect that groundwater for drinking water uses. So this map shows you every purple dot here is a site of PFAS contamination in the state of Michigan. Site of PFAS contamination is one where the groundwater has PFAS compounds in it over those criteria that we just showed you. So anywhere that we've sampled the groundwater and exceeds those numbers gets a purple dot. You're a site of PFAS contamination. In Michigan, we have, I think today our count is 168 sites of PFAS contamination. These are things like military installations, landfills, industrial sites, and airports, fire training areas. And honestly, we have more sites in Michigan that are contaminated with PFAS than any other state in the country. But that's not because we used PFAS chemicals differently or that because we had different, different practices or different standards. It's because we're looking for this contamination. Because there's no nationwide criteria, there's also no federal mandate to go looking for PFAS. But because of what we know, the health impacts and the prevalence and the occurrence of PFAS contamination, we are comprehensively looking for this. And so, it's not that we're more contaminated, we're just more aware of our problem. So this, Mary, if you could go back real quick to that map. So the map shows about, 168, 170 sites, but the truth is there's, thousands of potential sites of PFAS contamination across the state. We're probably investigating another 100 or so right now that aren't on this map. And so when we look at the universe of potential sites out there, we have to prioritize the work we do based on potential for impact to human health. And so anytime we're looking at a site of potential contamination, we're asking, what is the potential for this site to contaminate drinking water or to impact fish and wildlife? And we make our prioritization decisions based on those potentials for human health impact. And so speaking of that, I think our next slide is on to Amber Clace from the Department of Health and Human Services to talk about PFAS and health.
All right, thank you, Tracy. As introduced, my name is Amber Clace, and I'm a toxicologist with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. Next slide, please. So working together with EGLE, your state and local health departments are investigating the health risks facing your community so we can address them in a timely manner. To do this, EGLE conducts the site investigation, generating the data that we need to assess the risks at this site, while the health departments evaluate the data and determine what might need to be done to protect residents. Next slide, please. Now, as discussed earlier, PFAS chemicals are not new and they're not rare. These are widespread chemicals that have been around for more than 50 years, used broadly in industry, commerce, and residential applications. They've been used to resist stains in clothing, carpets, and upholstery. They've been used in food packaging and many other applications. These chemicals have been all around us. Today, our primary concern is finding contaminated drinking water and fish and wildlife and eliminating those routes of exposure to people. Next slide. And as I mentioned, PFAS have been around for a long time. Essentially, everybody has been exposed to these chemicals over the course of our lifetimes. The good news is that some of the major PFAS chemicals have already been phased out of use. And what we're seeing is that blood levels of PFAS in the population have been coming down. So while many people are just now finding out about these chemicals, we've already actually made a lot of progress to identify and eliminate the risks of PFAS. Next slide. Health studies have shown that exposure to high levels of PFAS chemicals are associated with a number of health effects in humans. As you can see here, exposure to PFAS can reduce a person's chance of becoming pregnant or increase blood pressure during pregnancy and possibly raise a person's cholesterol. Next slide. Some PFAS chemicals can also affect the thyroid, the liver, the immune system, and increase the risks of some kinds of cancer. Of course, our hope is to eliminate PFAS exposures and prevent these negative outcomes altogether. Next slide. When we receive the data from the well sampling, we look at the information holistically. First, we make sure that each home is below our health-based guidelines, called our comparison values, but we also consider the information more broadly. This includes what we call the site model, what we know about the PFAS source, how groundwater moves in the area, and any historic information that we might have, as well as PFAS results across the neighborhood. So we're looking at the data, but we're also going beyond the data. Next slide. I mentioned the DHHS comparison values. Not to get too deep into the science or the policy, but in short, the state of Michigan has multiple sets of safety values for PFAS in drinking water, including the DHHS public health screening levels and the EGLE maximum contaminant levels. Both sets of numbers were developed to protect everyone, including unborn children, but the underlying science is a little bit different. So in order to be as protective as possible, we consider an exceedance of any of these numbers to be a concern that we will act on. So our comparison values are the lowest numbers available for each PFAS. Next slide, please. And this table provides the numeric values themselves. Next slide. Oh, excuse my dog for just a moment. Also, as I mentioned, in looking at the data, we consider the results of the investigation as a whole. Just one moment. I'm sorry about that. That's the first. So as I mentioned in looking at the data, we consider the results of the investigation as a whole. In this example, we've got two scenarios. In both cases, the center home in yellow has a detection of PFAS below the comparison values, so we could conceivably say that that home is safe. And in the example on the left, no other homes in the neighborhood have PFAS detected, so we're probably good. But in the example on the right, we have a higher level PFAS detections across the neighborhood, which indicates that we have a significant source of PFAS in groundwater. In that scenario, we might likely provide a filter to everyone, regardless of individual results, because we can see that there's a problem. Next slide, please. I also mentioned the site model. This is everything we know about the site. Where is the PFAS coming from? Is there a single body of groundwater, or are there multiple aquifers, maybe separated by clay layers? Which direction is the groundwater moving? How far is the PFAS gone? Where do we think it might go? These are all questions that might not be obvious from lab reports, but which can have a big impact on how we respond. And every site is different. Next slide, please. In terms of responding to PFAS at a site, we have a couple of options. We often see that there's no problem. Sometimes the release from a site is insignificant and there's no threat, or maybe the drinking water aquifer is protected by a clay layer underground. In these cases, we might not need a public health response. In other cases, we may want to provide residents with filters or even bottled water based on what we see. This could be because we see a problem with their drinking water, or it could also be that their water is fine now, but we can't guarantee that into the future. Filters give us an option to help protect residents while the investigation continues. But I'll note that we do not consider filters to be a permanent solution. If drinking water is contaminated, then we need a new source of clean water, but that can't happen overnight. In the meantime, filters can offer us a way to protect everyone while we find a more permanent fix. And with all of that said, I'll pass it over to Mary at EGLE to discuss the site investigation. Thank you.
Thanks, Amber. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mary Carnegie. I am the site lead for the SOCRRA Avon Landfill. I'm a solid waste geologist in the Warren District Office. And as Tracy mentioned, I am your future regional PFAS lead. So please take note of my phone number and email address, and please contact me at any time with any questions you may have. With that, we'll jump into the site. There we go. So to get started, we'll just kind of orient everyone. So we can see that the landfill is located near the crossroads of Avon Road and DeQuinder Road. The Clinton River is just a little bit to the east of the site, and the Honeywell drain is just south of the site. This red line shows us the approximate outline of the site, so it's about the border of where the waste is. That blue arrow shows us the groundwater flow direction. So as you can see, it's basically to the southeast. After a long time of monitoring, what we've noticed is that the groundwater discharges into the Honeywell drain, which then flows into the Clinton River. The two wells you will see I have called out on here in orange, those are the two wells that we currently have detections for. One vocabulary word I did want to cover before we get started, you'll hear me say the word down gradient. That is similar to saying downwind or downstream. A little site summary. So we saw where the site was located on School Road in Rochester Hills. It's a municipal solid waste landfill, which means typical garbage, and it was closed in 2005. It has not received any garbage since then. SOCRRA owns and maintains the property. The groundwater flow we talked about goes to Honeywell Drain and then eventually to the Clinton River. As an added layer of protection at this site, there is a subsurface clay wall basically built on that red line in the previous map that restricts the groundwater from flowing off-site. So as this is a Part 115 regulated landfill, it is regularly monitored and has been for years. There are 6 monitoring wells around the site, and they are sampled semi-annually for non-PFAS compounds, it's things like volatiles, metals, some other inorganic parameters that help us detect if there is a leak from the landfill and if there's something we need to investigate. There is no known offsite impacts of non-PFAS compounds. In MMD, Materials Management Division, we ranked all of our landfills and requested the high and medium priority landfills to do a screening for PFAS in their wells. SOCRRA did that in July of 2020. They sampled 4 of the wells, and one of the down gradient wells had PFOA over the cleanup criteria that Tracy was introducing earlier. So because of that, the site becomes an MPART site, and it triggers more investigation. So the site is currently doing quarterly sampling for PFAS in all of its monitoring wells, and it will do that for the 2021 and 2022 calendar years for a total of 8 events. The first quarterly event is completed and we have the results. And in those 6 wells, the 2 down gradient wells that were on the map have an exceedance of PFOA. All the rest of the PFAS compounds that were tested for were either non-detect or below criteria. So because we saw this exceedance of PFOA over our cleanup criteria, which is the same as our drinking water standards, that leads us to investigate drinking water wells in the area. In conjunction with DHHS, Oakland County Health Division, Macomb County Health Department, Rochester Hills, and Shelby Township, we worked together to identify a list of wells that could potentially be affected by PFAS. Our search radius was approximately 1 mile down gradient. So at the end of April, we sent letters to 27 addresses asking for permission to sample these wells. Deadline to get back to me with access agreements is the end of next week, May 21st. You can get that to me either, by post office. You can email it to me, you can text it to me, whatever is the easiest way. We just need the information. And if that is any sort of issue in any way, please contact me and we will figure something out. So a few more details about how the sampling will occur. We have our state contractor, AECOM, perform the sampling. And we have COVID protocols in place to keep everyone safe. So they will give you a call when they have your access agreement to schedule a sampling time. So it's no surprise when when we're showing up. The sampling will be done in an outside spigot, so you don't have to allow anyone access to your home. You'll be able to identify the sampling team. The photo on the right shows the badge that they will be wearing when they come to your home. It's important to know that the sampling is at no cost to you. So we sample your well, and then it takes about 3 weeks for us to get the results. So, us and DHHS and the local health departments will get the results. We take a look, see what there is to see. Hopefully it's all good news and it's all non-detect. And in which case, that information will be shared with you, but also it will be shared if there is a problem. If there's any imminent health risks, you will be contacted immediately via telephone to figure out, a situation where you're drinking safe water, whether that's bottled water, filters, eventually hooking up to municipal water. But the local health or the health response will be handled by DHHS and your local health department. And this is something they're already prepared to do. If, we see a lot of homes with exceedances of these drinking water standards, we may need to expand the sampling. So that's something that EGLE and DHHS will look at. And then a note just on your municipal water that's in the area, because we're talking specifically about, personal wells that serve a property. The municipal water is, if you're hooked up to, all the sewer lines and all of that. So the Great Lakes Water Authority distributes water in this area. Their intake is in Lake Huron, and they have been sampled multiple times over the past few years for PFAS, and has always come back non-detect. Also a note on surface water sampling and fish sampling that's been done in the Clinton River watershed. So if you see this tiny little box here and this kind of blow up, so this is the site, the SOCRRA Avon Landfill that we're talking about, and then the Clinton River here. Here is the Yates Dam, which limits fish migration. So all the fish sampling was done upstream of that dam. So the takeaway from this is there are no exceedances of water quality standards in the surface water locations that were sampled, and there were no concentrations in fish that caused any restrictions where you can't eat a certain type of species, or you can only eat it so many times a month. So the fish are safe to eat in the area that we collected with the data that we have, and the surface water is also meets water quality standards. So with all that information, this now, makes you a resident from an impacted community and makes you, eligible to join our Citizens Advisory Work Group if that's something you may be interested in. It is a voluntary work group that advises us, MPART, on how to best engage and empower communities and how best to educate the general public. We're always looking to improve in those regards, and you as citizens are vital to that mission. So I encourage anyone that's interested to take a look, get more information, and sign up. And I will show you how to do that as I do a little tour of our website. Is the website up, or are you still seeing the slides?
You'll see your slides. You may have to do a new share to get to the website. Yep.
Yep, I will get on that. Excuse me. Do you see it now, Les?
Yes, we see the website.
So here's the landing page for the PFAS Action Response Team website. You can see it along the top. We have these banners that have the major categories that you may be interested in for more information. We also have these trending topic buttons, popular pages, some FAQs. You also have the ability to sign up for updates if you are interested. It's an email subscription. So in our health button, this can give you a lot more depth and information, like what Amber was discussing, a lot of the nitty gritty toxicology type things, if that's something you're interested in. More information about the numbers that we use, and just resources for PFAS in your drinking water, different types of exposure, the foam, and, stress coping as well, because this can be, difficult pill to swallow if you've realized you've been drinking contaminated water. So we also have under our drinking water, we have information for private residential wells. So it tells you about, what we're doing, what you can be doing, if, what filters are good for PFAS, because not all filters do the exact same thing. So there are specific ones for that. Other sampling guidance and laboratories, and also some words about municipal water. We also have, here are the numbers, and kind of talks about the rulemaking and how they become law. If who are interested in that. We also have the statewide sampling of all municipal water supplies in the entire state. And just to give you kind of a flavor of that, we have, all these different phases and data that is posted for here for you. So you can look through, and every single result is posted for every single sample. So we have them by county, the water supply, and you can see, what the results are. This will be updated in the near future to include some more information. So keep an eye out for that. And we also have another FAQ on here. So we have, educational video, some more, important information. A lot of people have questions about, their pets and livestock and how it affects them. Investigations, that will talk about places like what we discussed tonight. So SOCRRA is a PFAS site. Areas of interest are places that are a little more broad. They're not just one landfill or one business. So you can see it's, kind of like areas, and you can click on those for more information. The PFAS sites are listed similarly in the database. So you're able to, scroll until you see whatever site it is, and you can click on any site and it will bring you to the summary page. So you can get, a little more information, some timelines, some next steps, and hopefully a contact person as well. Additionally, we also have watershed investigations. So most, if not all, of the major watersheds are represented here, and there are timelines that talk about, the surface water sampling, the fish sampling, and any actions we may have taken. Testing. This talks a lot about our drinking water. So you hear a lot about foam being spotted on lakes and streams. Our IPP with our wastewater treatment plant, sampling guidance. We have, as we were talking about, this is an emerging contaminant. We still have a lot to learn. And one of those things is, how do you get rid of this stuff? So we're, exploring different avenues of treatment. So this is all more information on that. Fish and wildlife, we can look up those Eat Safe Fish guides that we were talking about. So, you're probably familiar with certain ones for mercury or PCBs maybe. So they're, be similar with PFAS. We also have some data for PFAS in deer due to DNR head sampling. So there may be more information if, you're a hunter, know some hunters, it's that's a good place for that. There's also more information on foam, on our water bodies and our firefighting foam. And lastly, we have the MPART tab, which, tells you everything you could ever want to know about, the executive order and meetings and all our different groups and all our different members. And this is also where you would be able to sign up for the Citizens Advisory Work Group. So you have the advisory groups, and then right here is the Citizens Advisory Work Group. Tells you, a little bit about what they do, what they charge. You can see their, agendas and notes and some summaries, the calendar, list of current members, and if you would like to register or if you have any questions about that. All right, and with that, I think we are ready to jump back into questions from anyone.
Hey, Mary, can you bring back up the your MPART, your presentation? Yes.
That's what I'm, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, sorry, a little slow, I guess.
No worries. Excellent. Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Amber. Thank you, Tracy and Abby, for the presentations. I'll turn my camera on, apologize. We have one question so far, and I just want to remind everyone, we have 12 attendees on that have hung out with us tonight. So thank you for joining us this evening. So if you have questions about anything that you you've seen on the slides tonight, anything that you heard that you have questions about, feel free to go ahead and type your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, or raise your hand and we'll unmute your microphone so you can ask your question of the panel tonight. We don't have anyone on the phone, so we just have we have 12 folks that are watching, possibly more if they're watching with others. So Mary, the first question that we have this evening concerns the MPART pages that you were going through. And the question is, can we use specific pages for public information?
Do you think that means like to post to someone else's website or to share that? I guess I don't understand the question, Les.
Yeah, what I envisioned when I read this was, is there specific ones that individuals could use as a resource? And it would be the way you describe the MPART page is that all of it's public information.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. None of it is, yeah, it's meant to be shared. It's meant to be a resource for anyone that uses it. And, if it's, by that same token, like we were talking about the learning, if there's other resources that people have and other information to contribute, that we want that, again, through like our citizen advisory work group. And so we can incorporate this new information. So that website is constantly being updated and constantly adding new information. So we want it to be as current and cutting edge and shared. And yes, we'd like to be the resource.
Okay. Thank you, Mary. The next question, I'm not sure if this one's for you, but let's see where this one goes. In the letter we received, it says that SOCRRA had submitted a plan that was approved. Can we get a printout of the plan?
Yes. Yep, contact me and I can share. So the plan is what we discussed about the quarterly sampling for 2 years. So it basically just lists the wells and the parameters that'll be sampled for and the frequency, and that's basically the content. But yes, that's a FOIA-able document, so it can be shared.
Okay, thank you, Mary. I've included Mary's contact information in the chat, as well as links to the MPART page, links to the health information on the MPART page, as well as a link to the Avon Landfill PFAS site. All the information is in the chat for you to copy out and for your use. Presently, Mary, we don't have any new questions or any hands raised. Would you or anyone for anyone else on the panel would like to have any additional comments or remarks while we wait for additional questions?
I think one just popped up, Les.
Yes, one just did.
Right.
This new question is, if our water tastes or tests bad, who will be responsible for paying the hookup to the city water?
That's a good question. And I think the answer is that it depends.
Uh-oh, Mary, you muted.
Yep, that was an accident. That's something that the local health department and DHHS, when they are responding to that situation, I think SOCRRA is a possibility because they, are a liable party. I think we have, sometimes we have grant money that's available for, but in this particular scenario, I don't know the exact answer at this time. Amber, is that something that was addressed in the PHAP? Do we know the answer, or is that to be determined?
So, the public health action plan addresses short-term, making sure that we get people filters and water right away so that everybody's drinking water is safe. Those municipal water hookups are really going to vary site by site. And I think that becomes a conversation between, the state, municipalities, liable party. And I would expect, that would be a plan to be worked out if we get to that point. So we've made sure that we have a short-term plan in place to protect everybody's health, and then hooking up to municipal water becomes the big job.
Right.
Hey, Mary, if I could, I would just add one thing to that. And Amber, make sure I get this right. But if somebody's individual well exceeded the safe criteria, and DHHS and the local health department came in with filters or other short-term options to provide safe water. That option will be provided until a long-term solution is in place, right? So don't think of it as short-term, like there's any sort of time limit on it. It's just until the final resolution is in place. Is that right?
Exactly right.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Amber, Tracy, and Mary. We have a new question that's come in. Are PFAS actually able to be removed or cleaned up, or are they here to stay in an area, but the area is just managed?
So again, that depends. It depends on basically the risks are the biggest thing that drive our cleanup decisions. So, you know, if there's an area where there's very, very high numbers, and those very high numbers are, you know, exposing people to to ingestion hazards, either through, you know, their drinking water or their fish or things like that. You know, there are treatments available. Granular activated carbon is one that's, you know, commonly used. Reverse osmosis is commonly used. However, if there's, you know, low levels in the groundwater and we don't see any contamination, you know, in the fish or in the surface water, you know, everyone's wells are safe to drink, then, you know, the risk would be considered mitigated. So it would not be necessary to, you know, dig that up or treat that particular water. So all of our cleanup decisions are driven by the risk and the exposure that they may cause to human health and the environment.
Thank you, Mary. Next question deals with GPS coordinates. Are the GPS coordinates of the site that are positive on the website?
There is latitude and longitude currently posted on the MPART website, yes.
Okay, thank you, Mary.
Yep. There's also, just in addition to that, on that database that has those coordinates, there's also an interactive map on there. So you're able to click on that interactive map button and kind of scroll around, zoom in, zoom out, and, you know, see where all the MPART sites are around the state and their proximity to, you know, water bodies or other MPART sites or, you know, other things of interest in your community.
Great, thank you. So Mary, I put a comment in the chat about the webinar. This webinar is recorded. We will have a recording available in the next few days. Once the webinar is ready, it will be posted to EGLE's YouTube channel, which I've included the link in the chat. Please check that in the next day or two, and you should see the recording for this website or for this webinar, as well as other MPART community meetings that have occurred throughout the state. So I'll stay tuned for that. And again, it'll be in the next few days. We have another question. Does the depth of a private well translate to the likelihood of PFAS detection?
So it would only be correlated if the PFAS contamination was found at a similar depth and was traveling, you know, in that same subsurface layer. So it's not, you know, a matter of you're more likely to find it across the board, you know, shallow or deep. It's really more a matter of where the source is located in your area. So, I mean, in general, there's a lot of restrictions on shallow groundwater use, just in general, just because of, you know, all of the contributions from industry for the past, you know, 120 years, and, you know, landfills, agriculture, all these other things. So there's a lot, you know, a lot of superficial contamination that can easily contaminate your shallow groundwater. But if the PFAS contamination is at depth and your well is of a similar depth, then it can just as easily migrate there.
Okay. Yeah, but that was a follow-up question. I think you got it. Next question is, do you know how deep the wells are that are being tested in the area?
The monitoring wells or the residential wells? Does it specify?
Does not specify, just says wells. So,
Okay. I don't know off the top of my head. I would have to look up that information. If you could please.
oh, we have it. It's a monitoring wells is the follow-up.
Okay. I can get that information. They're not, very shallow, but I don't have a number off the top of my head. I will have to look that one up. So if you can get me the contact information of that person, I can follow up.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you, Mary, and thank you to the attendee for following up with the follow-up question. All right. Again, Mary's contact information is in the chat. If you would like to reach out to Mary with more specifics on your questions. And presently, we don't have any new questions. So Mary, do you have any final thoughts or anyone else on the panel?
Just, please send those access agreements back and, take advantage of the free sampling, please.
Okay. All right. Anyone else? All right. Seeing that there are no new questions or any hands raised, I want to, on behalf of MPART and EGLE, thank you for taking the time to spend part of your evening with us on this important conversation. Please utilize the resources that were provided today and visit the MPART website. And again, check EGLE's YouTube channel for the copy of this recording. And with that, Mary, and to our attendees, thank you. And that will conclude this evening's webinar. Please have a wonderful evening.